Hello, everybody. So tonight we're going to cover the rest of the constitutional amendments. So I told you earlier there were 27 of them. We really only talked about 10 of them so far. So let's get to it. So again, tonight we're covering two different objectives because, well, to cover the Civil War objectives would take about 30 seconds. So we're going to get into two different ones. So we're going to talk about 2.9, which are the Civil War amendments, and 2.10, which are suffrage amendments. And suffrage, yeah, it sounds like a really bad word. It's actually a good thing. So your vocab tonight is to abolish, equal protection, suffrage, prohibition, repeal, poll tax, and line of secession. So there are some amendments that honestly for this class you just don't need to know for this class. Again, when you get into some AP courses or even next year in your Americas 1 and 2 or AP US, there are certain things that you're going to have to know by then. So I always want to make sure that you guys are introduced to it, at least in this class. So the first one is the 11th Amendment. It placed limits on suits against other states. It's not really something that we have to deal with so much now. So again, not something that's that important for this class. The 12th Amendment revised the procedure for electing the president and vice president. This you will need to know next year for U.S. history. So it used to be that your president would be obviously the top vote getter in the electoral college and in the general election. And then the vice president would kind of be like the runner-up. Okay? So just think about that and, the election that's coming up and how that would work. Well, let's just say it didn't, and it doesn't, and it won't. And so they had to revise the process for having a vice president who actually ran with the president on the same ticket for the same political party. So, the 16th income tax. Yay! We love the 16th Amendment. So, the 16th Amendment gave the federal government the right to tax your income. Yay. Alright, so the 17th Amendment dealt with the direct election of senators. It used to be the states and the state legislatures who elected the senators to represent the state at the national level. Well, now you and I as voters get to directly elect those people to positions in Washington, D.C. The 20th Amendment is called the Lame Duck Amendment. So the way it works is that your general election is in November, and the inauguration used to not be until March. And so there was a long time period where the president really didn't have any power, but he was still president. The new president had been elected, and they called him the lame duck. So now, if you know anything about elections, your inauguration is going to be in January, which cuts down on the lameness of the duckness. All right, and the last one, again, that is not really truly important for this class is the 27th Amendment. It says Congress can't increase or decrease, not that they would ever do that, their own pay for that specific term. So they can increase their pay, and it would go into effect in the next term, and then their hope is, obviously, they would get reelected. So, the Civil War amendments, guys, are 13, 14, and 15. And yes, these were written during... Yes, the Civil War. You guessed it. Awesome. All right, so the Civil War amendments were dealing with basically race relations during this time period. And just because you have an amendment doesn't mean that there aren't ways for certain states to still follow the Constitution, but not necessarily give you everything that you would have wanted. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. Okay, so the 14th Amendment defined citizenship and said basically anybody who is born here in the United States is a U.S. citizen, okay, regardless of their race, regardless of their background, their religious beliefs or non-beliefs, you're a citizen. And also provided equal protection for everybody that was a U.S. citizen. Now, the last one, African American males had the right to vote according to the 15th Amendment. Now, there were certain things like literacy tests and poll taxes and all these Jim Crow laws about the grandfather clause and things like that. We'll talk about those in class. that although, according to the Constitution, African American males had the right to vote during the 15th Amendment, that certainly wasn't true everywhere, and it didn't look the same in every state because, again, the states come up with election laws. Dun, dun, dun. So, we have two amendments dealing with alcohol, the 18th and the 21st, and they deal with the exact same thing, just kind of in reverse. So the 18th Amendment prohibited the sale, the consumption, the creation of alcohol, and that did not work out really well. Okay, if you know anything about the 1920s and well, trying to control people in this type of way, it did not work. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution is the only amendment that has been repealed or taken back. Okay, and it was taken back by the 21st Amendment, so it took a little while. But this is also during the progressive era too, so you'll see some of these other amendments, and it's the idea of kind of moving forward. So the 21st Amendment said, you know what, that 18th Amendment, that was a bad idea. It's not working out well for us. We're trying to control something that honestly is too difficult to control. All right, a lot of amendments deal with suffrage. Okay, suffrage sounds like a really bad thing, but it's not. It's a good thing. It's voting. Okay, it's having a voice in your government. We talk about this being popular sovereignty a little bit earlier in this course. So the suffrage amendments are as follows. Again, the 15th Amendment, African American males can vote. The 19th Amendment wasn't passed until 1920, and it said that women had the right to vote. Okay, and in order to get there, it wasn't just like women woke up one day and said, hey, it'd be really awesome if we could vote. They had been fighting for it. They had been lobbying for it. People were put in jail. A lot of women were put in jail. Just because they had this idea that they wanted to be able to have a voice. So, 19th Amendment, women can vote. 23rd Amendment, so the people in Washington, D.C. can have representation in the Electoral College. Now, this one's kind of funky, right? So, people in Washington, D.C. have always had the right to vote, okay? But we know that the Electoral College is kind of got the final say-so on this whole voting process thing. Well, Washington, D.C. is technically not a state, okay? So what we were looking at are people who were not having their voice heard in the Electoral College because they simply were a part of Washington, D.C. So although it's the place where, you know, our nation's laws are made, they still didn't have a voice. And so the 23rd Amendment gave them that voice. They said, okay, Washington, D.C., people who live there get 3 Electoral College votes. It counts as kind of the equivalent of one of the Dakotas. Nobody lives there. So, again, they get 3 Electoral College votes in the North Dakota and in Washington, D.C. The 24th Amendment outlawed poll tax. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. Basically, you had to pay to be able to vote. You had to pay a tax to be able to vote. And so if you think about the people who were able to afford a tax to be able to vote, it was certain groups of people that just did not have the opportunity to be able to vote based off of their socioeconomic circumstances. So again, 24th Amendment outlawed that. The 26th Amendment reduced the voting age from 18 to 21. This was during the Vietnam War, and during the Vietnam War, the average age of a soldier was about 19. And so we sent 19-year-olds to go and fight in a war they might or might not have believed in. A lot of them did not make it back. And so the idea about this was, you can send me off to war to maybe lose my life, but yet I have no voice in the government whatsoever because I'm not able to vote yet. And so, again, reducing the voting age to 18 during the Vietnam War and the 26th Amendment. All right, so there are easy ways to remember all of these too, and I'll teach you them during class. So if it seems overwhelming at this point, don't worry about it just yet. All right, so the 22nd Amendment limited the presidency to 2 terms. This was because of FDR, and if you know anything about history, this gentleman was elected 4 different times. So had he not died in office, he would have been the president for 16 years. That's like as old as some of you are. That's crazy. So people thought, you know, that's a long time. It's a really long time to be like, you know, the most powerful person in the world. And so they limited that to 2 terms. The 25th Amendment deals with presidential succession. Basically, what happens if the president dies or has to go into surgery and is, unconscious for a certain amount of time, or if, just something happens to the president if he goes, crazy. So the first person that's going to take over is the vice president. Most of us know that. And then it's actually going to be the Speaker of the House, then the President pro tem, and then the Secretary of State.